Hey guys, what's up? Are you guys morning people? I'm certainly not a morning person. So bear with me a little bit. Never announced Creative Mornings before. I'm going to be reading a little bit of notes for you. So first off, I'm Will. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself in a second, but I'm one of the co-owners of Cypher Prime. We're the oldest running game studio in Philadelphia. Once again, we'll get back to it later. It's only 8 years. It's not a big celebration, guys. So first off, global theme this month is time. Dane's going to be doing an awesome talk basically about the universe and time. I also have some really embarrassing photos of him and I that I'm going to show you guys to introduce him. So basically the global sponsor we have is FreshBooks. Basically the growth of, well, this in every city wouldn't be possible without them. We love them. Their products are cool. This is the place we're in right now. I don't know if you guys know this, but the very first Creative Mornings talk was here. It was Eric Smith. He talked about sex. Managed to never talk about sex the entire time. It was an amazing conversation at a talk. I also have to tell you guys that on December 16th to February 15th, there's an amazing thing going on here. Constructing Play. I'm assuming these are somewhere so you can get them after this talk. At the front table, if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about it. Let's see what else. Oh, yeah. Sponsors. So first off, Hubbub. Hell yeah. Coffee. We all need that right now. I've had a couple. I'm like a little jittery, and I didn't sleep that much. Honeygrow. I had some cool things. So Honeygrow's got a couple new locations. One in West Philly, 37th and Market on the UPenn campus. Cherry Hill, which is like right about where I grew up. And Wilmington, Delaware, which is where I went to school. Things you guys do not need to know. The Good Motion Project, pretty much all the video and stuff you see here. Where are you guys? Can you raise your hands because you're here? Yeah. Thank you. So first off, hashtags. Creative Mornings and CMPHL. So if you hate something we do or you love something we do, let's talk about it. Creative Mornings is brought to you by a hell of a lot of people. I've been to a couple, and there's always like 20 people making them happen, and they're big, they're all over the city, so there's a lot of people to thank. Photographers again. So, I'm going to do this intro for Dain. Dain's been my business partner for a couple years now, like 8 years, as we were saying. We have matching tattoos in our 5th year. It took me a really long time to convince me we should do that. You can hit him up on @Dain Saint, or you can look at our games at cypherprime.com. We also run a co-working space in Philly. It's the only game co-working space. We have about 52 members. If you go in there on a good day, there's like 5 of us making something. We also have a thing called Philadelphia Dev Night. It's one of the largest meetups in Philadelphia. It's every Thursday night. Happens at 7 o'clock. It's in the same place, which is basically 3rd and Chestnut. If you want to talk about games, create games, play them, they can be a new variation of tag, whatever. We're there. We'll be very happy to help you through it. But let's go through my photo album. So what I did was I realized that I finally get to introduce Dain for something, and his talk is going to be really serious and amazing. You guys are going to like it, I promise. You can slap me later if you don't. You really can. And I thought it would be really cool to have a little bit more of a funny intro since it's time. What I did was I went through my phone for the past 3 years, and I found like not the most embarrassing photos, but like pretty embarrassing photos of Dain and I. So first off, I want to say that we don't always have great outfits, but we look really good when we're wearing tights. This is Dain's hair back in the day. That's his girlfriend. She's lovely. This other girl, I'm sure, was probably a girlfriend at the same time. This is one of his best friends. This is how I met Dain in college. Johnny was my roommate. We got really drunk and played Smash Brothers. It's an amazing video game. It brings people together. This is one of our first team photos. That's Kerry up there. He now works as one of the lead devs at PunkHev. He's grown up a lot. This is us when we had hair. We don't anymore. Some of the awards we won, I think they stopped that year, but it was like 2.9. Oh, this is the Geek Awards this year. I try to make out with Dain on a regular basis. You'll see he's a very attractive man. Oh, I don't know if do you guys ever play StarCraft or heard of it? We had one of the guys who made StarCraft come in and he gave us a figurine with a team that signed it. This is a big moment for us. It means nothing to you, but we cried. IGF, we were on stage somehow. We made a bad Kickstarter video, a really bad Kickstarter video. It got worse. Dain sings a lot. He does like 8 static shows. He's like a fantastic musician. He's really into it. We wear glasses that are similar because that's what you do when you go to these kinds of shows. Yeah. Sometimes, you make things and you're like, oh, I'm going to put this on my website. It's going to be fucking awesome. And then you think that's not a good idea. Dance. You always wear funny glasses. We made some games along the way. I think we have like 5 or 6 games. I don't know. The Geek Awards, the year that Final Form won. This is a signature Dain Saint look. These are the 5-year tattoos. I was going to give you guys the gruesome one where they're all bloody, but this is like funnier. Yeah, lots of thrown out things for the website. Once again, Dain with multiple ladies around him. Company photo shoot. Splice, it's one of our games. It's about science. We had a very fake scientist play the game. This is when we got the logo up for the Game Forge. Our very first game of beer pong in the office. Did you know that this happened and I documented it? I don't remember. This is Sean, once again, one of our really good friends. We recently made a thing called Headlight. Doesn't matter. This is us making that thing. This was one of our art shows we recently did. We were both hipster hunks. I don't know if you guys know this is a thing. It's when you're like ironically terrible at life, and they put you on the cover of Philly Weekly, and people are like, "You're really cool," and you're like, "I don't know why." That was my photo. Yeah. Dain recently did a dance. The dance was actually spectacular, but I managed to capture the most awkward photo I could of him during the dance. So, that up, Dain. So I think this is actually my last slide to introduce you to Dain. You can tell he's got some muscles. So Dain, show us what you have. Thank you, guys.
Hey guys, so that was illuminating. I gotta show you this real quick. We didn't think that we're going to be able to get presenter notes set up for this talk, so Paul was nice enough to print out the presentation. This is not the most useful thing, but I feel really happy to see that we're gonna go through this many slides. Don't worry, they go super quick. It's not actually this long. So how's everyone doing today? Thanks for coming out at morning and coming to listen to this talk. As Will said, my name is Dain Saint. I'm co-founder of Cypher Prime Studios, probably best known for Auditorium, Splice, and Intake. I'm also 1/3 of Deep Dark Hole, which is an experimental games project founded with me and Will and another ex-Cypher Prime employee who's now living in New York, like a trader. And I'm a director of the Philly Game Forge, which is Philly's first and only co-working space devoted exclusively to games. This talk is about asking the right questions and getting answers from the natural world. It might be a bit unusual, but I'm hoping that it will inspire you to look at things a bit differently. So, without further ado, the universe. Experiments are currently underway to determine whether our reality is in fact a simulation. But what does it mean if it is? I believe that as game designers, we can answer that question. Let's start at the beginning. To the best of our knowledge, the universe hit the market around 13.7 billion years ago. Now, since humans have only started playing it around 200,000 years ago, the early years of the universe remain somewhat of a mystery. As near as we can tell, the universe spent about the first 2/3 of its product cycle in beta, functioning as a sort of planetary creation game until the release of the Earth expansion 4.5 billion years ago. This expansion would add the killer feature that would change games forever: life. Though early characters were primitive, this laid the groundwork for exciting new modes of play. And you fast forward to today, the universe has dominated the market. Counting humans alone, the universe has 7 billion players logged in as we speak, despite having no visible monetization strategy. And since the beginning of the Earth expansion, over 1 trillion hours of playtime have been logged by 100 billion characters using what has to be the most fun character creation engine on the market. And it's not hard to see why. The universe is impossibly good. We're talking joystick 5 stars good. It's an always-on, massively multiplayer experience with 0 lag and no downtime. Plus, the universe's patented Infinity Engine is a technological marvel, boasting infinite resolution, infinite raycast depth, infinite explorable space, infinitely destructible environments, and a level of detail algorithm that puts Red Dead Redemption to shame. Now, with a game that does so many things right, it's hard to believe anything could go wrong. In fact, most of the player complaints are lodged against the behavior of other players and not the game itself. But when you look closely, and I mean really closely, you can start to see the seams. There's a global speed limit. Things can only go so fast no matter how hard you try. That infinite draw distance, it turns out, is not so infinite. Some fairly major precision bugs pop up in the system when things get too small. And the physics goes absolutely berserk when you try to put too much stuff in one place. Despite all of this, the universe remains a seamless experience that many of us enjoy every day. So how does one make something this good? Although we've sent countless emails to the developers, we still haven't gotten a definitive response. So, to answer that question, we're going to have to break the game. To start hacking the universe, we first have to understand the limitations of the Infinity Engine. It seems natural to start with the rendering pipeline, so we'll start there. As some of you may know, traditional engines use one of a few variations on a technique called raycasting, where a ray is sent out from each pixel that needs to be rendered, bouncing off objects until it reaches a light source. The Infinity Engine turns this paradigm upside down using a proprietary system called photon. In this, particles of light, called photons, are sent out from the light source, accumulating color data as it goes along its way. Thus, the volume is filled with photons, and images are constructed by querying the photons that exist in a particular cross-section. Because the images rendered are time-dependent, the photons themselves have a speed, referred to as c, the speed of light, roughly 300 million meters per second. Now this is where it gets interesting. Photon is completely dependent on this constant, which means that we have found the first seam that we can start hacking at. If the maximum refresh rate of the universe is limited by this number, what happens when we go faster than it? Think about a game like Quake. Players have been using a technique called bunny hopping to go faster than the max velocity for so long that it's now essential to high-level play. So what happens when we try to go MLG Pro by surpassing the speed of light? Well, it turns out you can't. Nothing can. No matter how much energy you use, nothing in the Infinity Engine will ever go faster than the speed of light. Even getting close is damn near impossible. What gives? Well, when we take a look at the log to see what's going on, the result is bizarre. As an object approaches the speed of light, it gets heavier and heavier. This is very strange behavior. I've never seen a game implement this feature, but when you think about it, it's actually a very elegant hack. Because the heavier something gets, the harder you have to push to get it to gain more speed. Therefore, making objects heavier the faster they get gives you a smooth way of preventing something from hitting that max velocity cap. And you only start to notice the effects at near light speed. So, kudos to the developers for that one. Now, the fact that light has a speed is also partially responsible for another peculiarity of the Infinity engine, the maximum draw distance. Let's take a look at the storage engine to see why. In games, you need to be able to specify both where a thing is and when it is occurring. Typically, engines store these as two variables, position and time. 2D games store position as a vector 2, and 3D games store it as a vector 3. Time is usually kept as a separate variable and managed by a different system altogether. Conversely, the Infinity engine stores both time and position together in a single vector 4 using its proprietary storage engine, appropriately named spacetime. Now, most games have a culling distance. Items that are sufficiently far from the camera are simply ignored by the renderer. This is done to speed up rendering and assure smooth performance. But as we mentioned earlier, Photon doesn't work like most renderers. All possible viewing paths need to be ready to observe by any player at any time. In an engine that advertises infinite space, this means that items that are close to the viewer have exactly the same rendering priority as things that are billions of miles away. And this gives us the next seam that we can hack at. Is it possible to construct a view with so much stuff in it that we can get the renderer to lag, possibly even crash? And again, the answer is no. Well, why? Turns out there are two clever systems at work here. First off, space-time is constantly expanding, putting more and more space between the objects being stored, while the objects themselves are drawn together with gravity. This has the effect of making most of the objects in the universe clump together in clusters separated by an enormous space that grows every day. Now, some of the more programming inclined among you may recognize this as exactly the same optimization algorithm used for sparse voxel trees. Secondly, this expansion interacts with the photon engine in an unexpected way. Since photons have a speed, objects can be so far away that the light from them simply has not had time to reach us. Since the universe is about 13.7 billion years old, and light can travel 5 trillion miles in a year, any objects further than 65 billion trillion miles away are very naturally not rendered. When you work in the expansion factor, this creates a sort of rendering bubble that is around 230 billion trillion miles across. Now that is one hell of a skybox. Okay, so the universe can handle massive. What about tiny? What happens when we start to mess with the smallest objects in the game? To understand that, we'll need to look at how the universe handles geometry. Now, there are two main methods of storing 3D data in games today. The first, and by far most popular, is the vertex mesh method. Discrete points linked together with edges to form surfaces. This is a very quick algorithm to render, which has led to its popularity, but it fails to describe things that don't have explicitly defined surfaces, like clouds and water. The second method, starting to become popular with the likes of Minecraft, is the volumetric method. Here, objects are described by functions, and surfaces are implied by the intersection of these vectors, so of these volumes, and the rays used to render them. This renders volumes very naturally, but it has its own limitations. It's computationally expensive, rotation is difficult, and it makes physics that much more difficult to calculate. The Infinity engine, once again, has a unique solution: matter. In this paradigm, all objects are stored as something which shares properties of both discrete vertex geometry and continuous volumetric geometry. The API allows it to be cast as discrete for some calculations by calling matter.particle, and continuous for others by calling matter.wave. This is an incredibly flexible approach, but it has a weird side effect. Since you can only get at the data in these two very distinct ways, it can create some ambiguities. Let's take a look at this tiny piece of matter. It has a position and has a velocity. So far, so good. But I want to do something precise, so I need to know its exact position. To do that, I'll make it a discrete object by calling matter.particle.getPosition. Let's see what happens. Okay, well now I know exactly where it is, but I can no longer figure out its exact velocity. But what if I need that exact velocity? Well, I'll have to make it a continuous object by calling matter.wave.getVelocity. When I do that, I now know its exact speed and direction, but I can no longer tell you exactly where it is. This is totally a bug, right? I mean, this definitely feels like the sort of thing that can be exploited, and it definitely feels like something that should not have shipped with the final product. Turns out, the bug's there, though. This ambiguity is actually responsible for a lot of our technology. Computers, cell phones, and MRI machines all rely on clever exploits of this bug at the subatomic scale. And at normal scales, the uncertainty kind of just works itself out. The average player never notices because the ambiguity is extremely small. This is the prime example of a shippable bug. Okay. So far, we've explored speed, space, and size. Let's bring it all together and take a look at what makes the universe tick, the central processing module called quantum. Quantum is by far my favorite part of the Infinity Engine. A breathtakingly unique approach to computation, all physical interactions are handled by directly interfacing photon, space-time, and matter at the assembly level. For instance, the photons used in the rendering system are actually small bits of matter, spawned from energy allocated by other pieces of matter and ferried to and from via space-time. More and more complicated systems have been built on top of surprisingly few interactions. It's nice that you don't need to address a few billion particles every time you want to make a sandwich. Quantum runs the very base rule set that keeps the simulation going. As a matter of fact, gravity is sort of a side effect of this computation. As matter occupies space near other matter, more interactions need to be calculated, keeping the matter near each other for longer periods of time. To me, this sounds like a situation that could easily lead to an infinite loop. So here we find the last scene that we're going to look at today. Is it possible to put so much matter in one location that we can crash the quantum computation engine? It's not possible here on Earth, simply because there's already quite a bit of matter here, and it seems to be processing just fine. But in the depths of space, we've been able to find impossibly massive objects that seem to answer the question for us. What happens when too much matter occupies one space? Essentially, dead pixels. A scientist by the name of Stephen Hawking gave them a much more foreboding name, a black hole, because photons never leave these areas. These areas require so many calculations that they effectively have a sort of boundary referred to as the event horizon, and any objects that enter are lost to the infinite loop, presumably forever. Yet, the game continues to tick. Why? Well, if you think that this event horizon looks suspiciously similar to our rendering bubble from earlier, you're not alone. Let's face it, the more matter you have crammed into an area, the more calculations you need to run to calculate the simulation. And if that number passes a certain threshold, it makes sense to spin up a separate server to handle the extra load. And it makes even more sense to just run a new copy of the universe on that server, since it already has all the logic needed to run exactly this sort of simulation. Picture it. Multiple servers, each running a recursive instance of the universe, seeded with a starting mass and left to blossom. Each new instance, a beautiful reflection of the things that were and the things that will be. Servers, all the way down. So what have we learned? Obviously, there's so much more that we could cover, but we only have so much time, so let's review. 1. Use limitations creatively. The speed of light, or c, is the major limitation of everything that runs in the universe, and poorly planning around it could have been disastrous. But from the weird mass hack to the maximum draw distance, the developers consistently found creative ways to use that limitation to their advantage. Limitations breed creativity. Embrace them early and often. 2. Control your scope. The universe advertises infinity, but in practice, it settles for very big. Likewise, when making your projects, keep a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve. It's really easy to try and make your projects all things to all people, and it's natural to want to add every single feature. But remember, even something as expansive as the universe knows when things are simply out of scope. 3. Don't sweat the small stuff. That weird precision bug that pops up is super frustrating, and I know many developers that would stay up well into the night to try and fix it. But you have to remember to look at the big picture. If a bug doesn't make a game worse, honestly, it probably doesn't need fixing. Finally, embrace emergent phenomena. In games, we have so many distinct systems interacting in so many unique ways that it can be very hard to predict what's going to happen. And as designers, we try to exert exact control over the things that we make. But sometimes you have to take a step back and let it become what it wants to become. That result may actually surprise you. Now, the great thing about the universe is that it is literally everywhere. And as far as I know, the universe is open source, or at least has yet to sue anybody. So the next time that you run into a design problem that you're trying to fix, do what I do. Steal from the universe. All right. If I may, I'd like to switch gears briefly and talk about what drove me to write this talk. It wasn't the game industry or an overhyped game or a console launch. It wasn't a release schedule, and it damn sure wasn't Gamergate. It was an episode of Cosmos, a conversation with a friend. It was a walk through a city on a fall afternoon that got me thinking about all sorts of things that I normally would never even consider. And that is really what I came to talk to you about today, the things that inspire us to create. Earth is our entire world, but it's still just a microscopic piece of a minuscule galaxy in the tiniest fraction of the universe. And the games industry, it's tinier still. Simply put, there is so much more to life than games. Don't let the commenters fool you. People don't give two shits about frame rates, DLC, DRM, or in-app purchases. They care about having an experience that matters. And the only way to give it to them is to get out there and have some yourselves. So go. Be inspired. Level up. Do some quests. Expand your skill tree. Get every last achievement. Because if it is true that our entire universe, that everything we have ever known or will ever know is a game, shouldn't we be playing more of it?